Hey, Arnie, how's it going?
It's going good, Scott. Although I have to say, I am today and have been for the past week an angry man.
Why?
Well, the Parkland shooting is enough.
Right.
Enough is enough. And as you know, I'm a gun owner. I own 4 guns. So I'm not a snowflake about the issue of gun and gun registration and gun control and all of the issues that are embroiled in this controversy.
And by the way, you got guns when you came to Montana. This is not something you had in.
No, I had guns before.
You did?
Yeah, I had someone who had broken into our house when my wife was home alone.
Where was this?
In Kansas City.
Okay.
And as a result of that, we went out and got handguns.
Wow.
I have a rifle and handguns. But as I look at this issue, in this past week, we had hundreds of students walk out of schools in Missoula, Montana.
Yep.
There have been walkouts all over the country. There's a national March for Our Lives organized by young people, set up for March 24th. And it's shocking and sad that it's going to take teenagers in this country to maybe open the country's eyes to the need to do something about the horrific situation we find ourselves in.
Well, it's funny that you should say that because I listen to a lot of the teens talking on cable news. They're being interviewed by the cable news folks. And what I think is so refreshing and open about what they're saying is they're unfiltered. They're not media savvy. They just say what's on, in their heart and on their minds. And that's important.
I know, and I'm going to be a teenager today on the lead into the show, and saying exactly what I think about this issue. To me, as I look at it, and I try to analyze facts and look at history and put everything in its proper perspective before I really come to some kind of conclusion about it. To me, this is not about the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was established in 1789. It was established to organize primarily a well-regulated militia for 2 issues of importance at that time in American history. One was that the founding fathers were afraid to have a standing army because they were afraid to be overthrown. Right. So they liked the idea of states having militias to deal with issues. One of those issues was the ability to track down and capture runaway slaves.
Right.
So the roots of this from 1789 did not contemplate the world that we live in.
Right.
I know that most of the argument, I watched a legislator in Florida confront a group of teenagers this past week and say, this is about mental health and mental illness. Well, let me just tell you, we have as much mental illness in this country as every other country in the world. No other country in the world has the mass shootings we have.
Right.
There's an equal amount of mental health problems among men and women, but 98% of the shooters in these mass killing situations are white males. This isn't a mental health issue. This is an anger issue among white males. I mean, the data is conclusive on this issue. And implementing, a stronger mental health programs is not going to stop people from getting their hands on machine guns, which you can do in 15 minutes in many places around the country.
Right.
And venting your anger at innocent bystanders, which is happening over and over again. I mean, the last 2 should have been enough. Las Vegas was enough. Parkland is brutally enough. You have a son still in high school. I mean, you have to be concerned about somebody walking in. There was a threat in Darby School twice this past week. On social media, I'm going to kill somebody. I'm going to shoot somebody. Copycat concept. Right? Yeah, copycat. And the only reason they can do that is because they have access to weapons and weapons of mass destruction, not just a single musket with one shot in it, which was the weapon of the time when the Second Amendment was implemented. I think the NRA on this has blood all over their hands. I'm surprised people haven't spilled pig blood all over the front steps of the National Rifle Association. They've put hundreds of millions of dollars in the hands of politicians to keep guns completely unregulated and unsupervised. And any argument that is, that I hear over and over again about we have enough laws on the books. This is just a sick person. We have our, we're going to have to send our thoughts and prayers. That's just a cover up. The dirty little secret is that we are willing in our society to let innocent people be killed at an exorbitant rate in order to protect this fantasy that everybody should have access to whatever they want. It's ironic that they're not allowed to have weapons at the NRA convention. Weapons were banned when the president spoke in front of the NRA. Right. And there are plenty of reasons why they can impose restrictions.
Where is the convention?
I forgot. I'm not
thought
sure.
The town where the convention was, so they didn't want it.
No, well, of course they don't want it. I mean, but the dirty little secret is that the people that are proponents of keeping unfettered laws out there, are willing to accept a lot of carnage, and they are as implicit in these murders as anyone, as the person who pulled the trigger. They're an accessory to these murders, as far as I'm concerned. And folks like Alex Jones and Rush Limbaugh, who this past week were blaming the students for being paid organizers. Ugh. They're just a bunch of cowards, as far as I'm concerned. There's no paid students. These kids witnessed their friends, their relatives being gunned down in front of them with no mercy, by a sick individual who had unrestricted access to weapons. And these guys are hiding behind the Second Amendment and attacking people who are exercising their First Amendment rights. It's just a horrible set of circumstances. So let me say what I think ought to be done.
Yeah, tell us.
I understand that you're never going to. I'm practical. You can't. There's more guns than people in the United States. There's over 350 million guns in circulation out there, and that's an indictment in and of itself. But let's put that aside for a moment. What can you do? Well, you can start registering weapons.
Right.
You can start providing mental health. I don't mind registering my guns. When I bought them, they had to be registered. There was a waiting period before I got my guns in Virginia.
Right.
I didn't mind. I wasn't planning on shooting anything, in 24 hours that I had to have my gun immediately. Number 2, mental health background checks. Waiting periods, mental health background checks. And if you want to even get more serious, how about insurance for gun owners? I don't see it any different in many ways as having an automobile. An automobile kills people.
Right.
Automobiles have to be registered. Drivers have to have insurance. I guarantee you, if you required gun owners to have insurance, the insurance companies would regulate the gun industry.
Right.
So, it's an emotional topic for me because I listen to the arguments and they don't hold up any water. Australia had mass murder. They implemented a strict gun registration. They didn't take guns out of society. They registered it. You had to have background checks. There's never been another mass murder. There aren't mass murders in other countries that have as free of access to guns. It's not the people. It's the access. It's like hardware and software.
Right.
Right. The software might be damaged, or being people, but if they don't have access to the hardware, the system doesn't work.
That's absolutely
and
true.
In this particular case, to me, it's the same thing. So
tighter controls and rules and regulations.
And I'm sure somebody will come in here and say, no, it's we can't do that. It's a violation. It's not a violation of well-regulated militia.
Well, it's a violation of everybody's civil rights for them not to feel safe and for them not to feel
and again, the other dirty little secret is guys like to have machine guns for 2 reasons. One, because they like to go shoot them on the weekend at Targets and make believe that they're, fake video games.
Right.
Or real video. It supplants video games for adults. The second reason that they want to have weapons, is fundamentally because they just feel that somebody may attack their home and they want to have the biggest killing machine they can possibly have.
That they're right.
And there's always an example somewhere of somebody who had a gun like that and protected them. But those examples pale in comparison to how many deaths have resulted from
100%
from sick people who have access to killing machines,
who've abused it.
So, you can't ignore it this week. This past week, Olympics and death in high schools, were enough to push me over the edge. The combination of them.
Why the Olympics?
Well, the Olympics to me get to be awful boring because you're watching many different people doing the same exact thing and rating them, in a very technical
being coached
capacity.
by one or two people, by the way.
Every once in a while you get to see hockey or something else. But most of the skating events and even the skiing events you're doing the same course, you're doing the same exact thing. It's like watching a game of dunk. Slam dunk and trying to judge which one's going to do it slightly better. After a while, it gets to be boring.
Arnie, let's pivot right now to our guest.
Okay.
Right?
We're going to talk today on the show with Jeff Fee, who is the acting executive director for the Missoula Economic Partnership. And we've had the former director on before, a year or so ago. James Grunke, who is no longer here. He's moving on to other pastures in Idaho. And I think it's time to revisit what are the plans for Missoula's economic future and economic vitality.
It'll be a good conversation.
And, Jeff is not only the acting director for no pay.
Right.
He's taking this on as a labor of love, but he's been the chairman of the board for a couple of years. So he has his own take on the visions of Missoula and what we ought to be doing to not just attract new business, but help existing business grow and prosper.
Looking forward to it. Our guest is Jeff Fee. You're listening to What Do You Know? Proudly supported and sponsored by Engel & Volker's Luxury Real Estate and our good friend Don Maddox. Back after this with Jeff Fee. Okay, we are back with Jeff Fee.
Jeff, it's good to see you again.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
A few weeks ago, we were talking about healthcare and the state of American healthcare. But we have you back to primarily focus in this conversation about economic development. You're the former chairman of the Missoula Economic Partnership. You're now serving without pay as the interim chief executive for the Missoula Economic Partnership, now that James Grunke has moved on to other pastures back in his home state of Idaho. Tell me a little bit about the history of this public-private partnership that MEP is as the leader of economic development activities in Missoula.
Sure. Well, when I got out here in 2006, I had been previously involved in economic development organizations back in Tennessee, both in Chattanooga and in just a town, Sumner County, north of Nashville. And one of the things I came to appreciate through those involvements is when you get the right people around the table, you actually can define and have an impact on what the community that you live in looks like 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road. When I got here, I kind of did a brief survey of what was going on just internally and recognized the fact that Missoula wasn't really in the economic development game. We had bits and pieces of the economic development puzzle, but we certainly weren't in the game from a comprehensive, proactive, outwardly facing perspective. And quite frankly, when I first got here, the two words economic development were dirty words. People didn't like hearing economic development. It was like, oh, you're gonna change Missoula. Well, never waste a good crisis, right?
Right.
So the downturn hit. We ended up losing Stimson and then subsequently Smurfit. And the residual impact of jobs and the job loss, not just for those, but the other organizations that and jobs that actually supported those, the indirect impact was pretty significant. And it was at that point in time we said, well, we have historically been an extraction-based economy, coupled with, we got big medical but it's been, if you look at the history of Missoula, it was an extraction. There's a lot of lumber coming out, and we felt like that we needed to diversify our economic and infrastructure so that we weren't overly reliant on one particular sector. And so with that downturn, we ultimately ended up commissioning a report that kind of gave us a lay of the land and we asked the guy to put a critical eye towards what we have, what are our assets, and where are our deficiencies in the economic development game. That report came out. It obviously ruffled some feathers, but it needed to ruffle some feathers because things needed to change. And obviously, sometimes when change needs to happen, it is somewhat disruptive, and it was disruptive. back in that particular point. But we were successful in creating a public-private partnership that really brought the city, the county, the university together with private industry, which the majority of our funding is from the private sector, to really come together as a community of business and organizational leaders to help define what Missoula would look like. And we really wanted to make sure that anything that we were doing deliberately was going to focus on growth that built upon areas of strength that also were congruent with the culture of Missoula.
Sure, you have to take advantage of the culture of Missoula.
You have to take advantage of the culture of Missoula. We're not going to be landing, and nor did we intend to, land any Volkswagen manufacturing plants, but the story I like to tell early on was Chattanooga. I ran in a track meet in the early 80s in Chattanooga, and at that point in time, Chattanooga was an armpit. I mean, they had outsourced a lot of jobs overseas. It was a dirty town, manufacturing focused. The riverfront was a mess. And I remember thinking, man, this is not a nice town. Well, you go to Chattanooga today, it is exquisite. It's a beautiful, and it took community leaders coming together and saying, we're going to revitalize downtown, we're going to revitalize Chattanooga, and we're going to get in the economic development game. And it's economic development game is a long-term play. It took years, and let me finish the story real quick. And they got into the game and they started making plays. And ultimately, they landed a Volkswagen manufacturing plant when Detroit was shuttering plants. And that's what happens when you actually get in the game and start making plays. And like I said, we're not intending on landing any Volkswagen manufacturing plant, but when you get in the game, start making plays, things do start happening.
Sure. And it is a very competitive game.
It's a very competitive game.
And Missoula, as you have already done with MEP, has to play to its strengths. You can't compete with giving largesse out as other cities do,
right?
To a greater extent. I do work for the Savannah Economic Development Authority. Savannah is only about twice the size of Missoula. It's about 140,000 people.
Got a lot more tools in its toolbox.
The Savannah Economic Development Authority has a $7 million a year operating budget that comes from, a lot of it comes from port fees. They got 16, 17 full-time staff. They're constantly traveling abroad, recruiting. I mean, and then they're giving incentives to companies that are coming in that we just don't have the ability to do.
Right.
So since we can't compete in that game, what's our strength in the what's the message that we put out there for attracting business? And then I want to talk about a point that I think is much more important in economic development, which is helping existing businesses expand and grow.
Which is one of our highest priorities, right? When it comes to business attraction, interestingly enough, most businesses that we attract here have some connection.
Sure, and that makes sense.
On Western Montana.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and people have traveled here, they've got married here, some connection, and once they see the community, they're like, you know what, I could really live here.
Right.
So there's always some type of connection, and oftentimes it's a former University of Montana grad that is wanting to get the hell out of Montana after they graduate, and they realize they spend the next 20 years trying to figure out a way to get back.
Well, it's almost like the analogy to retirement living. All these places are competing as the best place to retire, but most people aren't going to go someplace where they don't know anybody, where they don't have any connection. They're not going to say, well, it's really cheap in Birmingham, Alabama, so I'm going to go to Birmingham. They don't do that. They go someplace where they have some kind of connection, and I agree with you. That's how most of these businesses
days
come.
of college when you were footloose and fancy free.
Well, all of these.
I want to relive that.
Well, yeah, it'd be hard to do that.
But that's what I think. That's what I think motivates people to come back to that.
Well, they're coming back in the old sawmill district here for that reason.
Right. Absolutely.
And on the podcast show that I do, Can Do Lessons from Savvy Montana Entrepreneurs, most of the young ones that are coming back, the Michelle Hueys, and others like that are coming back here, or coming here, are coming because of personal connections. They have a loved one that's here. They went to college here. They want to raise their family here. It's why Seth Bodner came back.
That's right.
Applied to be president of the University of Montana.
That's right. But getting back to the playing to your strength, I mean, one of the things that is a strength for us is the university. Huge economic cornerstone for our economic foundation for Western Montana. And one of the things we've done in the past is plugged into alumni events in different parts of the country where successful alumni get together, and we're selling Missoula. We weren't actively out there selling it, And you have to have your act together because it is highly competitive. Site selectors.
Jeff, where are they doing that, by the way? What
the most recent one I believe that we did was in the Bay Area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So well-heeled communities too.
Yes.
Well, some people get tired of the Silicon Valley and the cost and the travel and the
right
and the the density of that place.
Right.
That's right.
Recruitment.
So when we're talking to a company, what are the 4 or 5 things that they're looking for when they're trying to make a decision about coming here?
Certainly, workforce is always the top question. Obviously, the cost of living for their workforce is always a factor, and that's one of the areas where we struggle because of and it's one of the areas that we as a partnership are focusing on, which is attainable housing. We don't say affordable housing because affordable housing has a certain meaning to it.
Right, workforce housing, attainable
this
housing.
This is attainable housing for the workforce. That's absolutely right. Oftentimes, and this is another one of the hurdles that we've had to overcome, is they look at ease of travel, especially for organizations that have employees that are going back and forth. And that's one of the reasons why we've been focusing on expanding our flight operations.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that METP took on early on, working with local businesses as well as the airport authority to try to get
Missoula.
Destination, absolutely.
Right.
And I have to say, we do. I know people, growl sometimes about, but I fly into places like Savannah a lot, and we have much better service here in terms of the variety and the connector cities. I like to say, and you know this, we're one stop from almost anywhere in the world.
Right.
And you can't say that about other cities that are even bigger, like Savannah. They have the Savannah Hilton Head Airport. They don't have the selection of, they fly mostly into Atlanta.
Right.
And then you got to connect from there.
Yeah, you're right. We actually have really good selection. The issue is just it comes down to cost. It's expensive to fly in and out of Missoula.
Right.
That's the main issue.
Well, so question for you is that as you're involved in this, and you got involved in this in 2006. Is that when you first came here with the hospital?
I started in August 14th, 2006, but who's counting?
At 9 a.m. It was a cloudy morning.
But I think it's but it's a natural place for you because the hospital really is the center of a community, and as it is here, right? As St. Pat's is or community is, and so the health and vitality of the economic status of the company of the town is important. Right, and it just feeds. It's just everything.
Well, and it's also a question I'm sure that I look at if I'm considering another place. What's the healthcare system?
There's a
like to serve my employees.
My question to you was, how did you get involved in MEP back in Chattanooga? Like, how did that all come about?
Well, let me get back and answer your question earlier because you bring up a very important point. When companies are coming in and looking, they're looking at workforce. They want to know that the education system is good, which we have an excellent education system here in Missoula, K through 12. They want to know about health care. So it really is about the quality of life for their employees and their employees' families.
I had visitors this past week from Panama, a family of 5 that came and stayed with me. And they were asking, they had never been to Missoula, never been to Montana. And one of the first questions they did ask is, we'd like to come and spend more time here. What's the health care system? Because they have children. They worry about what happens if my kid gets sick. The one of the people in the family had a pacemaker. Do you have somebody here at the International Heart Institute? That gave them a sense that this was not only a good place to come, but that it was a real place
safe
to live.
Right, gets back to safety.
Well,
really, safety is so important. We keep on talking about.
Well, we talk as the lead into the show that our listeners will hear or have heard already. But I want to ask you something else about the affordable housing and workforce housing. There is an issue about wages in Missoula, and it's a tough issue to deal with. We're attracting companies. Part of the reason some of the companies come here is because they can pay less for their workers here than they're paying in San Francisco or Seattle or Portland. But housing prices keep going up. I think the median housing cost here for a single-family home last year was $289,000 a year, and the average family income is about $46,000 or $48,000 a year. How do we move that up?
The wage issue, that is a tough one. I think one of the things we're involved in with the commissioning of the workforce study And one of the things we found out in that I think we inherently know, because when I first came here, we used to always talk about the fact that you have to have a PhD to be qualified to wait tables. Mm-hmm. We are an overeducated community in a lot of respects, and what we're finding is that there's plenty of companies out there trying to hire. It's just the skill set for the existing workforce is mismatched with the opportunities. So part of what we need to be doing is matching up the opportunities, and trying to help develop our workforce to be able to meet those opportunities.
Right. We have a lot of people. We have a low unemployment rate, but we have a lot of people who are underemployed here for sure.
That is absolutely true. And one of the reasons that we also, early on in MEP's existence, was we set our sights as a goal to get our average or our median household income competitive with what was in Billings. Now, if you look at Billings' economy, it's a very different economy. It's very heavy into
oil and gas and natural resources.
Right. So you got a lot of chemical engineers and people like that are involved that ultimately end up raising the overall average wage. But our point in what we've been trying to do is work with companies that will target and bring in higher paying jobs. If it doesn't meet a certain criteria, it's not to say we're not going to be non-helpful. It's just we're not going to actively spend our scarce resources trying to work with that company if they're not actually kind of growing the kind of jobs that we need to be able to improve the overall median income for Missoula.
Yeah, we don't need entry level wage jobs. We don't need $12 an hour jobs.
And one of the things that we've seen in recent successes, and we've seen a few companies decide to locate here or expand here. ClassPass being the most recent success, where we were actively involved in helping in their decision making process to decide on bringing jobs to Missoula. And they were impressed enough with their applicant pool. They are going beyond their initial hiring projections. And these are good, high-paying tech jobs. And one of the things I think that has been in recent discussions, there was an article in the Missoula Current not too long ago, about a potential tech corridor. There's a lot of conversations around what can we do, leveraging the university infrastructure, leveraging some existing companies to create more of a tech hub. Because when you look at it, there are a lot of companies that I think if they could get the right workforce that would love to get out of Silicon Valley.
Well, the good thing about a tech hub is if you're piecing together a hub and you understand what all the component parts need to be, then you can figure out what's missing, and then you could target your recruitment efforts, your attraction efforts. You say, if you come here, you will be the missing piece that fits in with all of these. We have programmers. We have a blockchain data mining operator. We have all these things going on, and this is one thing we need to have here.
That's right. And I think, and if you look at the profile for those jobs, they're high paying. They're of a demographic that absolutely melds with the culture of community, the culture of our community, and they're typically low impact in terms of their footprint. So, we still have to pay attention to the other ores in the water that we have. I mean, we've got a strong bioscience infrastructure here. I mean, just with the Rocky Mountain Labs down in Hamilton and with the infrastructure that we have at the university, there's a lot of intellectual capital.
Are you very
involved
in the university? Are you involved with the university right now through this position? Are you meeting with
one of our? I think it's our third goal that's specifically stated in our strategic plan is in partnership with the University of Montana, creating the infrastructure to support the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Missoula. So that's another one of our priorities, is trying to help get startups the infrastructure that they need to be more successful. And we are actively doing that in partnership.
Well, they have a lot on their plate, and we learned that when we spoke with Seth. So
sure. So here's the missing piece we haven't talked about, which is we want startups. We want to help businesses grow and expand. What is the financing piece of this look like in Missoula? What is the availability of capital here?
Well, so that's an interesting question in terms of funding deal flow, or?
Well, there's two kinds. There's startup money, and it seems like if you have a good idea, you can get some money for that.
Right.
I'm looking at more the mezzanine growth capital, which is harder to get at some point. You've gotten $5 million to get off the ground, and you're off the ground, and now you want to take it to the next level.
Right.
And do we have that money, the mezzanine financing?
We have started, and again, I being relatively new into my role, I can't speak as thoroughly as probably any of our staff can on this particular front. But early on in my tenure, we actually hosted an angel investor breakfast, and obviously that's not mezzanine level.
No,
but one of the things that was an interesting takeaway was when it comes to the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Montana. These are the ones that we met with were the Frontier Angels, and they meet 6 times, I think every 6 weeks, and they meet in a variety of different cities: Billings, Bozeman, Missoula, Whitefish, and they put 3 or 4 companies in front of these angel investors. And what this past go around, we didn't have a single Montana company represented. And one of their stated goals is that they want to increase the sophistication of angel investors to be able to answer tougher questions, and by doing so, increase the sophistication of our entrepreneurial ecosystem in Montana, because ultimately we are competing on the national scale. And if our local entrepreneurs aren't playing in the same ball field, we're not going to be able to land that kind of money. The angel investor group here in Montana they've never spent their entire pool of money. Mm-hmm. And it's not because a shortage of deals, it's because of shortage of quality deals.
Oh, well, that's always the case.
That's always the case. So there is money out there. It's about creating the network of investors to really start looking at how we create that investment.
My experience has been it's been harder to get the ongoing, mezzanine funding to move to a next level, the expansion money.
Right.
And one of the areas that I always thought we were behind other states in is using the Board of Investment Funds to invest in local businesses. In places like New York and California, they have mandatory requirements of like 5%, 10% of the state funds that are in pension funds and that are managed by the Board of Investment have to go into Montana businesses. Sure. And I think we put in less than 1% or 1.5% in Montana. So our investments are going in all kinds of other places, but not back into our own state. And that might be something that Missoula Economic Partnership and the university and others could look into, because we should be investing on our own. And there are a lot of good businesses out there that are ready to grow that just have a hard time finding money, at a reasonable rate that fits into a managed growth plan.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Let's do a quick ID. Our guest is Jeff Fee with MEP and other assorted businesses we'll get into later. We are proudly presented by Engel & Volker's Luxury Real Estate. Arnie.
Well, I think that the more time needs to be focused and spent, and I don't know the answer to it. I think it's one of the toughest questions to deal with, which is how do you raise salaries and job,
trust me.
Well, not prospects,
competition,
but competitive salaries. I mean, we don't have them even at the university, as much as people like to talk about, deans. The university president makes less than a dean does at most other schools in the region. So even at that level, you talk about he's trying to recruit a provost, which is really important. It's hard to find a quality provost at the salaries that we're going to pay. Most of the workers are in Missoula are underemployed. They have advanced degrees. They may not fit exactly.
What do you think the best job is to have in Missoula? What do you think the single best job is to have in Missoula, where you have the pick of the litter in terms of jobs available?
Well, it depends on your interest in in your skills.
I'll tell you what I know them to be.
Yeah, the
sales position.
Yeah,
you can't find it's hard to find
good salespeople.
A nurse or a PA, or they have the pick of the litter. I mean, they can go anywhere they want. Right? There's a shortage.
Well, millennial generation has, born into a technology era, and all of them are technology
Coders,
oriented.
Of course.
That also, gets back to the question of the character of the community. This is no longer, and Montana is no longer going to be a state of just extraction technology and timber and all that. The job future is not in those areas.
Right.
And even though we may produce a lot of wheat, it's going to be 6 farms doing it, right? It's not going to be all, micro farms out there doing it. And why we may be extracting some coal or whatever, but there'll be 1,000 people involved in that.
So what are the next, by the way, so how did you get involved with MEP in the beginning? Not here, but back when
you asked about Chattanooga.
Yeah.
Well, I actually, my first foray into economic development when I was in my first chief executive role at Hendersonville Medical Center, just north of Nashville.
Okay.
And we were losing a lot of it was the bedroom community to Nashville, and both hospitals came together with some other local industries. Said, how do we create some business growth here in Sumner County that give people the ability to stay in Sumner County, work in Sumner County at competitive wages? And so we ended up engaging NCDS, which is a company that came out here and ultimately did our initial feasibility study. And I participated in the search committee and was on the board of Forward Sumner. So when I landed and I recognized through that process just the significance of the economic footprint that hospitals have in their respective communities.
Sure.
And when you look at when I landed in Chattanooga, it was just a logical progression for me to get involved in Chattanooga. The chamber runs the economic development organization, and they're very economic development oriented chamber. And so I got to learn a lot from them in that process. They had been in the game for quite some time and were doing it pretty well. So when I landed here, one of the things that I quickly realized was this is not a sleepy little mountain town. I mean, I landed here with some of the most sophisticated, hard-charging physicians, high-quality physicians, and they were able to live here and practice here at the top of their license because we had the clinical infrastructure to do it, but they were also lifestyle-oriented. And so I recognized that, I mean, this was a very unique place because you typically don't have the level of care that was offered in a community like Missoula in a size of community. And that's because we are truly a regional referral center. So part of my thinking when I landed here was, healthcare is out of control. It's been out of control for a long time when it comes to the overall cost, and we talked a little bit about that last time. And I said, I was thinking to myself, if we don't figure out a way to diversify our economic strength and make, instead of healthcare being one of the leading sectors, healthcare being a trailing sector, we're not really doing our job as an economic development organization.
Sure.
Because it is, I think Warren Buffett referred to the healthcare industry as somewhat of a tapeworm. And when you think about it in terms of enabling companies to be competitive on the world stage, when Boeing knows what its labor costs are going to be 5 years from now, they know what their steel costs are going to be, but they have no idea what their healthcare spend is going to be, and they're competing against Airbus that does, that creates a significant disadvantage. And as a nation, we need to figure out how to reel it in because we're disadvantaging our companies. And so when you take that into the microcosm of Missoula, we've kind of adopted the same thinking, which was how do we work in partnership with MEP to help diversify and grow our economy so that healthcare really isn't one of the leading sectors, that it's a trailing sector. It doesn't mean that it gets smaller. It just means that there's other economic engines that are fueling that make it more stable.
Sure.
I do want to go off point for a minute because since last time there was an announcement that Amazon and Berkshire Hathaway and J.P. Morgan are going to form their own healthcare operation and serve about 1.5 million people. What's your thoughts about that? Is that a disruptor in the industry? Is that going to be a model for other people to emulate?
I think, so in reading up about that 1.5 million that they're planning on serving are their employees and their employees' covered lives. Right. And I'm not sure if any one of them have enough of a market presence in any given market to be that disruptive because you have to have a massive. But I think what it could do is it could drive consolidation of some high-end elective care into specific organizations that are doing really well. So I think it could be disruptive on certain levels, but is it of the scale? I mean, when you start thinking about the size of these three companies, it's like, they got the scale. But they have to have scale in their local markets to be able to actually impact the provider community. But then again, they haven't been real specific around how they're planning on doing it. Right. So they may have something up their sleeve that is massively disruptive. We will wait and see.
Exactly. But I think they would, wouldn't you? That they're going to bring a bunch of people under the tent.
Well, they might be their own mini, single payer system that creates such a difference in terms of cost that other people are going to be forced to try to do the same thing.
Right.
And that's to me would be the positive disruption that could cause. And Walmart or General Electric or others are going to say, well, if they're saving this kind of money and their people are paying less and they're negotiating directly with pharmaceutical companies and they have a little bit of a microcosm of what the whole country ought to be like, maybe we ought to be looking at it.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of Wild West stuff going on out there because I think we have reached beyond a tipping point. You got several health systems out there that have announced that they're getting into manufacturing of generic drugs because of the lack of availability. So you've got providers talking about getting into the pharmaceutical industry pushing. They keep pushing The cost issue is a big issue, but you've got insurers that are looking at getting into the provider community. Now you got private companies looking at getting into the healthcare business. So yeah, I've said it all along, healthcare is ripe for disruption. Part of the problem is until you fix the gridlock in D.C., it's going to be marginal disruption.
I mean, because the truth is, can't the president of the United States just issue an order and we can buy pharmaceuticals in Canada? All he has to do is issue an executive order that's allowable. And that would cut a number of folks' costs a third.
Sure.
Well, tell us about some disruptors. What are you thinking? Like, what are you seeing out there that?
Well, I mean, I use this as an example, and I know people are working on it. But when you think about the fact that the iPhone is only a little over 10 years old, I mean, I think that technically it's 14. But when you start talking about, I mean, when I came out here in 2006, I was using a BlackBerry,
right,
and I'd never heard of an iPhone before. Now you can get on a freeway, and it will tell you exactly how long it's going to take you to get from one side of L.A. to the other side of L.A. with a level of precision that is absolutely scary.
Taking into account all the traffic.
Well, it will tell you how to divert to get around.
And that's simple technology. We haven't really even started seeing mass integration of sensor technology and with genomics and with artificial intelligence. You start
for
factoring
our audience.
All this
tell us what genomics are.
It is. It's basically where they're looking at your genomic sequencing to determine what you are susceptible to from a disease state, and like in cancer therapies, what type of regimen is most effective for treating the kind of cancer that you actually have. So it actually enables you to individualize treatment and actively serve as somewhat of a predictor for some of the things that you may be experiencing later on in life.
You know, lots of people have gotten as presents. I did. You know, the 23andMe, where you do genetic testing, and the medical profile is scarily accurate in terms of, you know, what tendencies you would have. And I just imagine that in real time. If you have a sensor that can detect in real time all of your genetic makeup and tell you how to modulate intakes of certain, I mean, it's changed.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And, you know, I used to watch Star Trek. I wasn't a Trekkie, but I used to watch it and to say there's no way that we're ever going to see that kind of medicine. But you start thinking about what's going on. It's not that far off to think about when you start thinking about just the exponential growth in technology and how technology builds upon itself. When you start marrying artificial intelligence with genomics, with individual sensors, your ability to change healthcare is extremely real, and it upsets the existing paradigm. It's one of the reasons why I have what kept me up at night when I was running St. Pat's, because it's a bricks and mortar. It's a heavy bricks and mortar, and it's like going back. I would wake up in the middle of the night and like, okay, who's my Netflix? Who's going to come along without a bricks and mortar, not being burdened by bricks and mortar, and absolutely completely disrupt? Now, the difference between us and Blockbuster is we're going to have hospitals. We need hospitals. But hospitals, my prediction is hospitals in the next 20 years are going to serve a very different role than they're serving today.
I think so. You say we need them, but I'm thinking of Star Trek, and you could have it all done in your home at some point.
There's going to be a lot of things that are going to be pushed way upstream that are going to prohibit.
That's where Amazon comes in. The drone will be the doctor drone.
The doctor drone.
What's this in front of me?
Well, this loops me back into economic. Yeah, yeah. Cough for your drone. But looping back, artificial intelligence is going to have a major impact on workforce, and preparing a workforce. I mean, it used to be said years ago, but I think it's painfully more true now that what you're studying in school by the time you graduate is obsolete.
That's right.
You know, and the marriage of that. I'll tell you one quick little aside. So this Panamanian family visiting, and they have a 5-year-old son, and he's bilingual, and you know, great kid. And I have a little Alexa sitting there. I have a little Echo Dot, and showed it to him, and he says, Alexa, and it answered him, and he got so excited about it. It said, Alexa, tell me a story. And Alexa can tell stories. Tell me a children's story. Play me music from Beauty and the Beast. Pretty soon, Alexa was his friend. When he came home, when we were outside, he ran over to Alexa and said, Alexa, did you miss me? He didn't realize it was artificial intelligence. He thought it was like a telephone connecting him to a friend. And I started thinking about what is the potential of that, you know, when you apply all of the new...
Our heads are all going to the same place.
I mean, it's. I mean, it was
Alexa.
Well, I'm just saying I just read an article about Alexa is going to take on.
No,
I'm just saying.
But it's in your house already.
Alexa is going to take on a bigger role. They say that the Alexa and Alexa may be as important, believe it or not, as the internet was. Having this artificial intelligence in your home to walk in and just say, Alexa, order me a pizza. Alexa, what's the temperature going to be tomorrow? Right. Alexa, send the stuff to the dry cleaning. Alexa, what should I make for dinner?
You got to
How do I make
Siri,
it?
By the way.
Yeah.
If you really don't want anyone listening, you got to disable Hello Siri, Hey Siri, and she comes up.
Well, I know, but I'm saying it's self.
Yeah, I'm not a Big Brother conspiracy theorist, but this has got me really thinking. When you start thinking about everything that who's listening to and how that can be taken out of context and used against you. We all do silly stuff in our own homes, messing around with our kids, messing around with our wife.
We never think of this as being two-way, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, where's all this information going?
Yeah,
it's interesting. And I said never, somewhere. But you know what? I may be old-fashioned, and you're right.
But you're talking about genomic. You're talking about sensor technology and the portability and everything. I mean,
well, we're optimists, and we think of all the positive side of things. But you just touched on something that's important. There's a negative side to a lot of this, of the Big Brother having that much information on you, having that much, background on you. This stuff never disappears. The forensic people, every text you've ever sent, everything you've ever looked up online is in somebody's database somewhere. And
it's scary when you think about it, but it's also a great opportunity. If you think about it the way we're talking about it with healthcare, right? And
we see about the positive side. Look at the way you could intervene so early in the process and identify things and treat them, and they may even be able to be, you may be able to be self-medicated on a real-time basis.
Well, those patches, no question. I see people walking around with those patches and those ports,
right,
all day.
What about all the new insulin pumps and all those things? They've made it almost seamless.
That's right. They sure have.
So that all of that is sort of changing. But it does get back to this topic of, what kind of workforce do we want here? Do we want people who are big brothers watching all of this? I mean, do we want all these technology companies? Many of the companies that are coming in here that I've been interviewing on the other show, from Submittables to Luminad, are tech companies that are hiring programmers.
That's right.
We got a city. We have a mini city within Missoula of programmers and technology people, and that could happen anywhere, but it is happening in Missoula. A lot of it has to do with the university. Almost every single one of these organizations have grown out of the University of Montana in some form or fashion.
That's exactly right.
It's interesting. It's an interesting topic. I mean, it's interesting to think about, but it's scary at the same time. But I like to think about, to your point, I want to be optimistic, how it's going to improve.
You want to know how you can get a pastrami sandwich in your house when you want one.
I want that. I want health care. I want to know that, heck, some predictability day to day that you can rely on, I think only makes people more productive.
And I think a community that takes that all on, it makes the economic development mission easier, because you have the things in place that people are asking for. And what they're asking for now, I think you've said, indirectly, is a little bit different than what they wanted 30, 40 years ago.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
What can't you replace with technology, by the way?
What can't you?
Human touch.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know.
I've seen some of the robots. So pretty.
I think you can
replicate. Today.
And maybe even improve upon.
You know what? I sure as hell hope not. Yeah. There's no hope for humanity if that's in fact the case.
No, it's true.
I hate to say it, but I think the technology has already been developed. Not that I know.
Well, there is. I forget who stated it. So but there's a saying that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's just not. It's not
available.
It's not available out there, but. It will be interesting to see if it truly affects, because there is something about the real human touch.
Tactile.
Well, there's always going to be.
It's the soul-to-soul piece.
Yeah.
Right. We're having a conversation now. If you were on the phone, it would not be the same conversation, because I'm not seeing your face. I'm not hearing the inflections in your voice the way I would over the in person.
Well, that's one of my biggest concerns about a company like Amazon, truthfully, that you don't have to leave your home for anything anymore. You can go for the movie entertainment experience, shopping experience, food experience.
Health
can all be
experience.
delivered to you in big cities in an hour by a drone.
Right.
So what happens to the human contact piece of it?
That's right. I think we have to be deliberate as a species to not let that disappear, because I do think that it wouldn't be good for mankind.
Well, you don't want
on a whole host of levels.
We've seen a lot of science fiction movies that have shown the horrors of that. Right? Somebody working at a little desk in a mindless place and goes home and that's their whole life, and that's not the life people move to Missoula, Montana for.
Yeah, but what's so scary about what you just said is that people are already doing that.
Right.
They're already getting lost in this and not the conversation.
Well, how many times have you seen people in the same room?
You can't see that
in the same
radio.
room texting each other.
You can't see that, but I was just holding the phone up to my face. I mean, the point is that it's already happening.
It is.
It's already happening. So I think that things that we enjoy, like recreating, like skiing, like we talk about all the time, eating, right? We talk about that all the time. Just these things that are tactile, that are...
Well, traveling. You're going to have 3D, hologram
seeing places.
where you don't have to leave your house if you want to go to Paris. You can do it in your own house by putting a unit.
How are you ever going to replicate the smells and tastes of Paris?
I don't know. In 30 years, people might not care whether they do or not. I mean, really.
That may not be that far off from reality, but at the end of the day, I mean,
it's cheaper.
It's cheaper, but I've actually working with a company that's working on some virtual reality, and it is amazing. If you put a virtual reality headset on your head long enough, and there's sunlight,
right?
You actually think it's a sunny day. You take it off.
I've experienced that too.
It's very interesting. But
and it's still so primitive right now too, which is scary to think how much better it's going to get.
But let me give you another side to it. And I'm generally not
By
on
the way, this is a conversation that
about
we're having,
economic development.
that we're not even. That, by the way, there's no alcohol or anything involved in this conversation.
Well, it's just that's what Jeff brings us out in us. We're talking about, but
it's a good conversation.
There are people who are afraid of traveling. They're afraid of being robbed. Right, they're afraid of flying in airplanes. They're worried about the personal safety. Virtual reality can give them the experience as the technology improves without having to be subject to all the negative things that they're fearful of in a crazy world.
Right, but you don't get to experience truly in that environment, at least not today, the cultural aspect.
No.
And that cultural cross-connection and connection is what actually is the groundwork for peace.
Right.
When you start understanding is the basis for any peaceful relationship. And when people make an effort to understand each other, that's when...
See how economic development can create world peace? Peace through trade. Peace through understanding. But I do want to say, what you're talking about is the reason why businesses like to move to a place like Missoula, Montana, because of the personal. You want to live in a town...
Right.
Where you know people,
right?
Where you feel comfortable, where you don't have to put bars on your windows,
where you can walk out of your back door and get in one of the most pristine trails. In the lower 48, it's fantastic.
Nature.
Right?
And if you watch,
man cannot control nature.
If you
maybe that's another answer to your question.
Right.
What can technology not replace?
Weather
or your connection with nature.
Right, your connection with nature, and that is greater than everything. Nature.
Unless you're at Caesar's Palace in Vegas, where they have the weather indoors practically.
Yeah, you're right. Or you're talking about the Venetian, where you look.
The Venetian, you look
right,
up
or Caesar's, right? The
forum shops. In the Venetian, you have the square from Italy, right? Right there. But it's not the same as. But in the future, who knows? People may not care about it.
We are bumping up against our time here,
and people who want to relocate their businesses to Missoula, Montana, and who want to stay here
and
build their business, want the experience that we're talking about. And Missoula Economic Partnership is a real important tool in helping them create the business environment that will keep them in a place like this.
Absolutely, Jeff. What are next steps for MEP though? They're actively looking for a full-time person there, or is it's a slow process?
We originally started the discussion as a board, and we have a board meeting tomorrow that we're going to be discussing. So I don't want to get out ahead of the board because the board needs to be the one driving it. But I do think that there is an appetite on the board to not rush in to just going ahead and replicating the existing structure. We still have, we've got great assets in Missoula. We've got great working relationships with other organizations where we have complementary work going on. And I think what we want to do is sit down and say, okay, well, how do we, if we're going forward, we've got an opportunity to take a breath, how do we take a small pause as an organization and say, do we need to rethink? We're not backing off on this. In fact, we're speeding up. The question is how can we speed up by using all the resources in Missoula more collaboratively to make all of our efforts more effective? And so if that means maybe thinking about it different structurally, then I think the board's open to do that. If ultimately the board decides they want to go out and replace, and we'll be launching a search, a national search relatively soon. I think there's generally a hope because of the profile that MEP has today that that we actually, while we're doing a national search, we're just vetting people against a national benchmark. But we're hoping that we actually find local talent. When I say local to the state of Montana.
Sure.
Well, and we'd be thrilled if we could find local in Missoula.
And Missoula itself.
So last word. Here's a new slogan for Missoula and Missoula Economic Partnership. Missoula, big enough to hold the future.
I like that.
Yeah, I'll give that to you for free.
And on that note, I would let's bid each other a fond adieu, and I'll see you next week.
Jeff, always great having you here.
Jeff,
thank you for having me. Soon. Yes, thanks.